This is the next workshop in the 2023-2024 Seal of Biliteracy Professional Learning Series. My name is Candace Black, and I'm your World Language Associate in the Office of Bilingual Education and World Languages of the New York State Education Department. We'd like to welcome you to Preparing for the Culminating Project Visit. Each year, the Office of Bilingual Education and World Languages conducts visits to small number of sample schools offering the seal for two purposes: to observe and participate in culminating project presentations and interviews, and to provide feedback and support to schools in the process. Schools selected for a visit are notified via email by September 30th, anticipating a visit to be scheduled the following spring. This webinar will review the protocol for the culminating project visit, from scheduling of the visit to the expectations for conducting the student presentations, interviews, and follow-up panel discussions, including a deep dive into the rubric that is used to provide feedback to schools. The webinar is recommended for any schools that will be visited this year, but is open to any school that wishes to learn more about this process. You already know who I am, and I have the pleasure of presenting today with a colleague and a friend, Dr. Juanita Reyes. Juanita, would you please tell us a little bit about yourself and start the presentation?
Sure. Thank you so much, Candace. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Juanita Reyes, and I am Program Support Specialist for the Capital District Regional Bilingual Education Resource Network, the ARBERN. I am housed at the Questor 3 BOCES in Castleton, New York, and it is my pleasure today to be here with you today. Thank you. So I'll just start here. There is a link here to the electronic handout folders, as well as a QR code. For your convenience. And just so everybody is aware, all the materials shown in this presentation can also be accessed on our website. And here is a picture, a screenshot of what the website looks like, so that you know that you're in the right space. Again, just Google NYSED and New York State Seal of Biliteracy to get to the website, and then consider bookmarking it for future use. Again, just to reiterate, to facilitate the submission of questions, please enter them in the following Google Doc, and the questions will be answered in the order they're received. If time permits, participants will be able to unmute themselves to ask the question, or they may enter them into the chat. All right, so let's go over our goals for today. So first of all, I can identify the general timeline of events leading to the culminating project visit, including the deadline by which selected schools are notified and how schools are selected. 2, I can find various resources pertaining to the visit on the New York State Seal of Biliteracy website. So that's going to include the culminating project notification form, the culminating project rubrics, and the rubric that is used to provide feedback to schools during the culminating project visit. I can also explain purpose of the template and the online form, and identify the information that is required on the notification form, as well as the deadline by which it must be submitted to NYSED. I can explain the purpose of the culminating project visit and the role of the SEAL coordinator during this visit. And finally, I can identify the expectations for the student presentations, the expectations for the panel interviews, and the panel discussion on students' performance following the interview. So we'll start with the culminating project visit timeline. So we're going to, we have here the pre-visit. So schools will be selected by September 30th. Then they will submit culminating project notification form 4 weeks prior to the first student presentation. And then school visit is scheduled. And that's going to happen with at least 2 weeks notice. During the visit, the students present their projects, the panel interviews students, and the panel comes to consensus on students' performance. And then for our post-visit, NYSED representative is going to provide written feedback on the visit to SEAL coordinator. Then NYSED representative and SEAL coordinator will meet to discuss feedback. And then the SEAL coordinator is going to meet with the committee to discuss and make plans to implement feedback next year. Okay. So when are schools notified of their selection for a visit? So the SEAL coordinators of each school selected for a visit is notified via email by no later than September 30th of that academic year in which the visit will take place. It is the responsibility of the SEAL coordinator to notify district or school administrators, the SEAL Biliteracy Committee, and any other relevant staff of the visit. Now, how are schools selected for a visit? Schools are selected for each region based on having at least 2 consecutive years of experience offering the SEAL. Preference is given to schools that, one, had 10 or more SEAL candidates in the prior year and have the same SEAL coordinator as in the prior year. And how many schools are selected for the visit each year? Well, we have 3 to 5 schools from each of the 7 regions of the state selected for each year for a visit. And here's a little map with the regions. So we're talking about Capital East, Hudson Valley, Long Island, Mid-State, Midwest, New York City, and West. So where can I find the Culminating Project notification form? So the Culminating Project notification form can be found on the New York State SEAL Biliteracy website under the required forms. And we have here a screenshot of that just so that you can see where you can find it. Now, what is the purpose of the Culminating Project notification form? So the purpose of the New York State SEAL Biliteracy Culminating Project notification form is for selected schools to communicate the following information to NYSED regarding the student presentations. So the location, date and times, as well as languages. Oh, there we go. There is an online form and a template for this form. So how do I use each? So we have the online Culminating Project notification form that is submitted to provide the information necessary to NYSED to schedule a visit. SEAL coordinators must submit the required information using the online form. And here we have a screenshot showing you what that form looks like. All right. So when must the Culminating Project notification form be submitted? So selected schools must submit the Culminating Project notification form at least 4 weeks prior to the first student presentation. And must I report the dates and times of all student presentations? Yes. OBEWL will review the dates provided and attempt to find a representative who is available to conduct the visit. So that's why it's important to have those dates ahead of time. So must I report the required information for both English and world language presentation? So no, for this one, the visits are exclusively to observe world language presentations. You don't have to schedule for it. You don't have to send the information for the English presentation. And how does a school go about making a correction to the Culminating Project notification form? Any corrections can be emailed directly to Candace, and here we provide her email. And the schools should not resubmit a new Culminating Project notification form. Instead, just email Candace and she will guide you. So what happens if I need to change the dates of the student presentations after I have submitted the online form? So any changes to the reported dates of student presentations should be communicated to OBEWL as early as possible to allow for the rescheduling of the visit. And when will I be notified of the selected date? So OBEWL will attempt to find a representative to conduct a visit and will notify the SEAL coordinator of the selected visit date at least 2 weeks in advance. Will the visitor attend all of our project presentations? No. So the visitor or visitors will observe 3 to 5 student presentations in languages other than English, including subsequent interviews and panel discussion on a single day. So it's just a 1-day visit. And will the visits be conducted in person or virtually? So every attempt will be made to schedule these visits in person. If a representative is not available to travel to the school, a virtual visit may be organized. And what is the purpose of the Culminating Project visit? So NICET conducts these visits to observe the school's process of culminating project presentations, to provide feedback and support to schools, to ensure the seal is being implemented with fidelity to the regulations and guidance established by NICET, and to verify the proficiency level of students earning the New York State Seal of Biliteracy. What part of the project presentations will the visitor observe? So the visitor will observe the student presentation, the interview of the student by the panel, and the panel's discussion of the student's performance. Now, will the visitor participate in the panel's interview of the student? Well, the visitor will be qualified speaker of the language. They will only participate in the interview of the student if specifically asked to do so by the seal coordinator. And will the visitor participate in the panel discussion on the student's performance? Yes, the visitor will be an active participant in the panel discussion of student performance following each presentation and interview. Now, who can serve on the panel of reviewers? So who can evaluate student projects and presentations? So to serve on the panel of interviewers or to evaluate student projects and presentations, a panelist must be a fluent speaker of the language of the presentation. Each panel must consist of at least 2 adult speakers of the language who are not related to the student. And only on rare occasions, when a student is presenting in a less commonly taught language, may a panel consist of a single speaker of the language. For languages taught in the district, there must always be 2 adult speakers of the language on the panel. And then what is the role of the seal coordinator during the student presentations? So this is what the seal coordinator has to do. Schedule the presentations, arrange for at least 2 adult speakers of the language to serve on the panel, ensure the student and all panelists understand how the project is presented and evaluated, trains the panelists on the use of the rubric, collects and keeps the documentation, so complete rubrics for the panelists' evaluation of the student, and at a later date, communicates to the student the decision of the panel, whether the student met the criteria to earn the 2 points for the culminating project. So now I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to turn it over to my co-presenter, Candace, who will be continuing with part 2 of this presentation. Thank you. Yeah, I stopped.
Thanks, Juanita. I really appreciate it. I want to reiterate to people as we begin this second part to continue to put your questions into the question catcher. We've already started to answer some of them. So in this part 2, we're going to take a deeper dive into the actual conducting of the process, and that includes a deeper dive into the rubric. So talking about how students' performance is evaluated, what you see in front of you is the OBEWL suggested rubric. So let's take a quick step back. Students must be evaluated by a rubric that is aligned to the Revised World Language Standards. However, schools have the choice of either using the rubric you see in front of you, which is our suggested rubric, or using perhaps a consortium rubric, or developing their own. If they do the last option, they develop their own, then it's required that they submit that rubric to OBEWL when they submit their notification form in December to ensure that the rubric is aligned. You'll see that this rubric is divided into our 3 modes of communication, which we're going to touch on, that they list the ACTFL proficiency levels, and that they have the target one that is highlighted. So it is important for our SEAL coordinators to know that NYSED classifies languages into 3 categories based on their difficulty to learn. And this research was done by the Defense Institute, which is a military organization that prepares servicemen and women to execute their profession in a target language. Our category 1-2 languages are our most common languages that are taught in school. These are ones that are designated as being closer to English and that use a Roman-based alphabet. And they are things like French, German, Italian, Spanish, as well as some other less commonly taught languages. The target for category 1-2 you're going to see is intermediate high for all modes. Category 3-4 are all other modern languages that are considered further away from English and that may or may not use a Roman-based alphabet or are character-based. These include things like ASL, Arabic, Greek, Mandarin, Russian, and all the other ones that you see there. We also have a category for our classical languages, which primarily is Latin. So you're going to see that these rubrics, which you can see on your screen here, look very, very similar. The only difference between category 1 and category 2 is that the target for category 3-4 is intermediate mid instead of intermediate high. And you'll notice that that's reflected on the rubric. The classical rubric looks very similar because the target is intermediate high. However, the focus is really on interpretive communication because those are languages that are no longer spoken for today. And these links are available right on our website. You're also going to see them in the PDF of the PowerPoint when that is added to the handouts folder for today. So you can find these right on our website. This is a little screenshot. It is right on the main page. And below that picture that Juanita showed you of the students on the steps with their SEAL regalia, you're going to see a series of blue, what we call accordions, because when you click on them, they expand. And one of the accordions is called Culminating Projects, Presentations, and Rubrics. And here is where you find the rubrics. You'll notice that you have a couple of options. First of all, you need to remember which category of rubric you're looking for, 1, 2, 3, 4, or classical. But then you have 2 options within each category. You can download the full-size rubric, which is multiple pages, or you can do a condensed rubric, which puts all 3 modes of communication on a single front and back sheet. These are very easy for your panelists to use, and we highly recommend them.
Candace, I'm sorry.
Excuse me.
Yeah, you're.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it was and you're not in slideshow mode.
Oh, I'm not.
We're still,
sorry.
yeah, and we're still seeing slide number 30.
Oh, I apologize. I wonder why that is. Let me do a reshare. You know, I have this problem all the time. I have 2 screens, but they're showing the same thing. So let me do a stop share. Okay. And then let me try a reshare. Okay. Do you see the one on Culminating Project Presentations?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thanks for letting me know that. I appreciate it. Okay. So here again are our rubrics, but now we're looking at a singular rubric, which is the 3 modes within the category 1-2 rubric. So we have interpretive. This is how well students can understand, interpret, and analyze texts using authentic written, spoken, or signed texts. In a nutshell, this is listening and reading. You want to think of text in a much broader sense. The target is intermediate high. You can see that these can-do statements give very clear language about what students should be able to do. The student can usually follow the main message, idea, or flow of events in various timeframes in straightforward paragraph length text. That tells you what they can do using different tenses in text of a certain length, again, paragraph length. The interpersonal mode is how well students can exchange information and ideas in conversations. This is done during the interview. And again, you can see by the same token that intermediate high is listed there in a very simple can-do statement that we encourage your panelists to pull from as they gather information and then come to consensus on the student's ability. The interpersonal mode is evaluated during the interview of the student. And then lastly, we have presentational. This is how well students can present information and has two different parts to it. Presentational speaking, which is evaluated when the student does an oral or signed presentation, and presentational writing, which is generally done before the student gives the presentation. And that is also evaluated by the panel, but it's the written portion of the project. And I recommend that the SEAL coordinator give copies of that to the panel before the student presents. It gives them a nice primer on what to expect the student to present about, so they're in the right state of mind. They know what they're going to be listening to. So the question we have here is, must students score at least the required level in each mode to earn 2 points? We do have some misconceptions out there, and that's one of the purposes for these webinars. The answer is yes. Students have to demonstrate at least the required level of proficiency in all 3 modes of communication: interpretive, interpersonal, and presentational. So anyone who's told you that they can just do 2 of the 3 modes, or they can somehow average it out, that's incorrect. They have to hit the required level in all 3 modes. So we have 2 webinars that are coming up that we highly recommend you consider either attending live like you are today, or watching the recording when they are out. They are February 28th, and that will deal with using the SEAL rubric to evaluate culminating project presentations. And in March, we have a webinar on training panelists to evaluate culminating projects and presentations. Again, I think that you'll find those very useful. So let's dive into each mode and just reiterate which part of the project is being evaluated. So the interpretive mode, which again is listening and reading, is generally evaluated by either the classroom teacher or the project advisor prior to the presentation. This is because of its nature. Again, interpretive is listening and reading. The panel isn't going to have the opportunity to directly observe listening and reading in the course of the student's presentation. That's why we ask that an adult who works regularly with the student do this. Keep in mind that this evaluation can either be a holistic evaluation, that is, the classroom teacher or project advisor will observe the student over the course of the project development and will come to an evaluation of what the student's skills are, or it could be based on an actual assessment. So teachers will, over the course of a year, give interpretive assessments, reading tests, listening tests, and the evaluation can be from that as well. Now, the interpersonal mode, again, is evaluated through the panel interview of the student that immediately follows the presentation. The presentational mode is divided again into 2 parts. The writing part is evaluated using the written portion of the project that is submitted to the panel prior to the presentation. And then the presentational speaking is evaluated through the student's oral or signed presentation to the panel. So we have a number of questions that have come up about how the student presentation should be conducted. And we've generated some general suggestions for best practices that we've seen around the state. You want to start by first welcoming the student, making them feel comfortable. Students are very often nervous. This might be the first time that they've had to do any kind of formal presentation. So it's helpful to acknowledge that public speaking can be stressful and do something to help put the student at ease. You're going to want to have the panelists briefly introduce themselves, especially if they're not known to the student, and then just go over what the presentation and evaluation process will be like. And essentially, it's the 3 items that you see here on the screen. The student will present their project, the panelists will then interview the student, and then the student will leave and the panelists will discuss student performance. Now we're going to break this out because we have received some questions in the past. We want to make sure we're providing clarity. The student presentation of the project is a monologue that is delivered in the target language by the student. And we ask that panelists only intervene if the student needs it. So if you're having a student who's in distress, you obviously want to intervene in that situation, or if the student is engaging in some kind of behavior such as they are reading their presentation instead of speaking it, that would be an example of an intervention that would be recommended. The panel interview of the student is a spontaneous conversation in the target language between the student and the panelists, and it must take place immediately following the presentation. So there is no expectation that these two parts are separate. Both parts are done with the panel and evaluated by the panel. And then finally, the student will leave the room and the panelists should immediately convene and share and discuss evidence of the student's proficiency using the language of the rubric that they gathered during the presentation. Again, we do not recommend that our panelists write down notes and then don't discuss the evidence until, say, the end of the day, and then try to attempt to remember what they heard based on those notes. We recommend a 15 to 20-minute interval for these student presentations, and that will allow plenty of time for the student to deliver their presentation, for the interview to take place, and for the panelists to deliberate and determine the proficiency level of the student. We do have a couple of suggestions, actually, for the student presentation. Students can have brief notes. These should not be complete sentences. Again, they should be brief. They should be checked by the SEAL coordinator prior to the student giving the presentation to ensure that they are not complete sentences, because obviously the temptation is for the student to simply read. Students may also have a visual aid. Often they'll use some type of presentation software or an app. And we found that this is of great help to students with the delivery of the presentation because it gives them natural prompts on what they want to say. It gives them some comfort. They have some kind of thing to really center what they want to deliver to the panelists. And it also can help the panelists comprehend the student. If a visual aid is used, again, there should only be short amounts of text on it, no full sentences, because we want to avoid the temptation to read off of it. Now, this begs the question, can the written portion of a visual aid, such as a PowerPoint, be used as the written section of the project? And the answer is no, because we are requiring that the visual aid, if used, only has short amounts of text and no full sentences. That would not suffice to be the narrative that's required for the written section. Now, there's no required length for the student presentation or for the interview of the student. But as you talk to students and panelists about this, what you need to consider is it needs to be long enough for the panel to gather enough information to justify the proficiency level that they assign to the student. We've attended, and when I say we, I mean people like Juanita and myself have attended multiple SEAL presentations over the last couple of years. And we have found that in general, student presentations of about 3 to 5 minutes are largely sufficient to accomplish this goal. So we're not saying it has to be 3 to 5 minutes, but we're saying that that's our experience, that is sufficient. We also have some suggestions for how the panel interview should be conducted. So the entire interview must be in the target language. This is not an evaluation of English if we're talking about a culminating project in a target language. All panelists should equally participate in the interview. So we have seen in the past, sometimes you'll have a classroom teacher who serves as a panelist, and they ask all the questions while the other panelists don't. We want to make sure that that's not the case. Students should be able to interact with multiple adults, including adults that they are not familiar with in the course of the presentation. The SEAL coordinator and the project advisor, for that matter, can provide question ideas for the panelists in case they think they might need it. This is especially true if one of your panelists is a non-teacher, that is someone you had to bring in, especially if they, for instance, speak a language that is relatively low incidence. You can provide them with some suggestions. They don't have to use them, but it's helpful in case they need it. When you think about forming those questions, they should be information gathering in nature. That is not yes, no question, but rather, what do you think of this? Or how did you come to that conclusion? They should be asked spontaneously and not simply read off of a sheet of paper. And they should be based on and flow from the student's presentation. So again, we don't want panelists reading off canned questions. They can be provided as kind of a nudge or an idea, but that conversation should evolve naturally. If you do provide some suggested question starters for your panelists, under no circumstances should students be given the questions ahead of time. This is a test of interpersonal speaking and listening, and therefore it has to be spontaneous. So if during the course of the panel interview, in the course of the presentation, the panelists identify that there's an area of the proficiency that the student didn't meet the target, they don't have the evidence for that, these panelists should be savvy enough to ask targeted questions during the interview portion to elicit a student response that may provide the missing evidence. I'm going to give you a very simple example. Very often when students present, they will revert to the language that they are most comfortable with. And for many of our students, that might be present tense. Now, there's nothing wrong with a presentation in present tense, especially if it's well done, but you'll notice that on the rubric, we talk about students are able to manage various timeframes. And so if I had a student who gave their entire presentation in present tense, as a panelist, I would note that, and I would make sure that during the interview portion, I would ask a student a question that specifically targets that skill. Okay. Keep going here. You may provide target language support during the interview as a panelist. When you have a student that inevitably reaches an impediment, so they need a word and they can't find a word, they're trying to use circumlocution to explain something. As the panelist, you can intervene and say, oh, you mean this, obviously in the target language, or provide some type of response that allows the student to get over that particular hump. Think about yourself as being a sympathetic interlocutor. That is someone who's used to speaking with language learners where you provide that natural help. What we're not asking you to do is provide students with correct grammar, pronunciation, or respond to a question by the student in a language other than the target language. So after the student has completed both their presentation and their interview, they should be immediately evaluated by the panelists after the student leaves the room. The panelists will review their notes, and then they will present the evidence that they gathered using the language of the rubric and come to a consensus as a group on the proficiency level that the student attained. We recommend that the SEAL coordinator collect the completed rubrics from each panelist, and they don't need to have the panelist name on it, because sometimes you will have a student who wants to challenge perhaps an unsuccessful attempt, and sometimes it's very helpful to have that background information where the SEAL coordinator can show the evidence that the panel determined the proficiency level for such and such reason, and that it wasn't the one that was required to get the SEAL. It's very important that the SEAL coordinator and the project advisor tell the student that they will not get the results of the panel interview or presentation immediately after they are done. And what we in fact recommend is that the SEAL coordinator hold off on giving those results until, for instance, you've completed a certain number of those students. So maybe after you've done, 2 days of this, then you can release it. Or ideally, after everyone has completed it, if they're all chunked together. You do want to give the student another opportunity if they need to, so giving those results on a timely basis is important, but make sure that the expectation is that the student will not get the result that same day. Now let's talk about the feedback that you will get as a school from the NYSED visitor. So the NYSED visitor, while they will not ask students questions unless you specifically ask them to participate in the interview, they will actively participate in the panel discussion on student performance afterwards. They will provide immediate feedback on the panel's use of the rubric. And at the end of the visit, that representative will specifically meet with the SEAL coordinator to provide additional feedback on the culminating project process as a whole. Within a few days, that representative will provide the SEAL coordinator with written feedback that summarizes that conversation. So it's actually helpful when the SEAL coordinator is setting up the date and time of the visit to allow maybe 15 to 30 minutes following the last presentation to meet with the visitor. So here's the criteria that we use. It's a very simple 1-point rubric with 4 expectations for the panel and 4 expectations for the student. So as you take a look at this, we expect that panels will consist of at least 2 qualified adult speakers of the language, except when a language is so rare that you can only find a single adult speaker. So you can have the principal of the school, for instance, come to these student presentations, but they can only be part of the panel that evaluates the student if they're also a speaker of that language. The second item, panelists need to ask spontaneous and open-ended questions exclusively in the target language on the information that the student presents, as well as logically flowing questions that extend the interview. Very often we see questions towards the end of the interview, such as, well, do you plan to study this particular topic when you go to college? And so forth and so on. The third item, if necessary, we want to see panelists providing target language support to the student during the interview, such as rephrasing a question or repeating something. Again, it's if necessary. If the item doesn't come up, the student doesn't need any help, then obviously that's not applicable. And then following the interview, panelists are to be seen discussing student performance and providing solid evidence for the proficiency level attained. Again, you're going to find some great opportunities to see what this looks like and actually participate in one at the 2 webinars I mentioned previously. This rubric is located in the same spot as the student rubrics on our website. Now on the back of that paper, there's 4 items that we use to give you feedback on student performance. So we want to see students delivering their presentations in the target language. If students are going to use notes, we want to see that they're brief, and students should not be reading presentation either off their notes or off of a PowerPoint. We want to see students delivering presentations that are sufficient in both content and duration so that panelists have enough evidence to determine the achieved level of proficiency. We want to see students actively engaging with the panels during the interview. If you look at the rubric, you'll see that this talks about not only students responding to questions, but also potentially engaging with the panel of interview by asking their own questions. And then if necessary, we want to see students eliciting target language support. So knowing certain phrases like, can you repeat, please? Can you say that again? Or can you say that in a different way? We do have a wonderful handout for you that hopefully summarizes everything that you saw here today. And you can see, I think, 3 of the 4 pages here on the screen. This is the document that is located right in our handouts folder, and we hope you find it very useful for today. I'd like to revisit our goals for today, and then we'll talk to you about where you can get some additional help. So hopefully you feel like you can now identify the general timeline of events that leads to the project visit. Hopefully you also know where you can find various resources, including the forms and the rubrics that we use for this. Hopefully you can explain the purpose of the template and the online form to identify the information that's required, and the purpose of the visit itself, as well as the SEAL coordinator during the visit. Lastly, we hope that we've made clear for you the expectations for student presentations, panel interviews, and the panel discussion on student performance. We do want to highlight to you that we have several resources that we think will be very useful to you, including the SEAL Guidance Toolkit. This is a series of 8 modules that you can use either individually or with your panelists, with your SEAL Biliteracy committees, and they run the gamut from getting started all the way to completing the end of year data form. We've highlighted 3 of them here for you today, module 3, 4, and 5, that really focus on the Culminating project and preparing for those panel presentations. Those are all on our website. We want to reiterate that we have 3 additional webinars that are coming up. We've already mentioned the first 2 that are going to focus even deeper on the Culminating project, but we also have one on April 10th called Demystifying the End of Year Data Submission Process. Now you'll notice that we have these little icons here on the right. These are actually digital badges that you can collect from either attending these webinars or watching the video recording and then taking a short post-assessment following that. You can get additional support by joining the SEAL Forum. If you haven't seen this already, this is a voluntary group of SEAL coordinators and other individuals that are interested in the SEAL that come together once a month on a virtual basis to interact, to be able to ask questions and discuss things relative to the SEAL. Attendance is completely voluntary, and those who do attend get CTLE credit for the meetings that they attend. Again, we meet virtually for 1 hour, 1 Monday of the month from September to June. The join link is right here. We'll make sure that we include it in the follow-up email that we send out. And we do have a Google Drive for that, so you can get access to all prior meetings. We also want to make sure you're aware of the wonderful local support that exists for the SEAL of Biliteracy. You see in front of you a map of New York State that is color-coded with the various RBIRN regions. So RBIRN stands for Regional Bilingual Education Resource Network. And these are the powerhouse arms of the New York State Education Department in each region. Juanita is from our Capital District RBIRN in yellow there. And you'll get on this slide all of the links to their websites. But I also want to show you the wonderful representatives that you have around the state. So you can see Juanita is right here. But if you are in a different region from the capital region, you can also pick out who your SEAL of Biliteracy specialist is at your RBIRN. Now, all of these people are ready to help you. They can answer technical questions on the SEAL. We even have people who will go out to your school, who will meet with you and your team to help you build your program. So please consider reaching out to them. And of course, if you want any more information, you can always reach out to myself or to Juanita. Our contact information is right here on this slide.